Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from a melting Macomb, Illinois. The ice has fallen and now it is falling again. If you would stand under a tree, it would be like it's raining on you right now. So a pleasant day outside, our first episode here in 2021. Happy to be talking with you folks here. We are going to have a fantastic show. We have a special guest with us today. His name's Matt Duesterhaus, and Matt is, well, he's a farmer in West Central Illinois, and we're going to be talking the life of a farmer. But before we get to Matt, we got to introduce our hosts that are here every single week. We are joined by Katie Parker, local foods educator in Adams County. Hello, Katie.
Hey, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. First episode after almost a 2-week break, so I'm tripping over myself. I forgot my water. I'm so thirsty. I don't know what to do right now. I'm a mess. So how about yourself?
How are we going to make it through the podcast?
Well, you, Ken, and a special guest, Matt. That's going to be the key, the ticket. I'm just going to sit back and keep quiet as I reacclimate to being in an office. So yeah, but can't complain though. Can't complain. All right, and we will also welcome our other co-hosts here. We have Ken Johnson, horticulture educator. Ken's in Jacksonville, Illinois. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris and Katie. We're still listening to Christmas music here, so still have the tree up.
You won't let that die, will you?
No.
How come? Oh, go ahead.
No, I have nothing to say.
How come there's no ice dripping off your trees, Ken?
This is a picture from the interwebs.
That's
not
sure. I'm sitting outside right now.
Although my backyard did look similar to this earlier this week.
It was actually really beautiful this morning. I think this was the last morning of the ice and snow on the trees. As the sun finally came up, I don't think we've seen the sun for several days. Sun came through the trees. It was an amazing picture. So I'm thankful to see that. But now if I go outside, it's all going to be gone. So, Well, Ken, Katie, we're going to be talking about farming today, the life of a farmer. And we are joined by our special guest, Matt Duesterhaus. Now, Matt, you're a farmer in West Central Illinois. Is that correct? Where are you located at?
That's right. My family farm is located just north of Quincy, Illinois.
All right, just north of Quincy. So you're right next to Katie. Katie's just north of Quincy there near Ursa. So that is amazing to see. And so today we want to talk about the life of a farmer. And we kind of put the call out to folks on social media. This is our Ask a Farmer episode. So people have sent in questions to ask Matt. He's going to help us answer those questions. But first, let's get to know Matt a little bit. So tell me, I know a lot of different farmers. I've worked with a lot of people who have farmed everything from vegetables to trees to there's people who farm fake money online. So Matt, what kind of farmer are you?
So we farm primarily grain, corn, soybeans, and a little bit of wheat. Every year we do have a small amount of livestock on the farm as well, with beef cattle and hogs as well.
So kind of you do a little bit of everything. And you said this is a family farm, correct? So how many generations was it?
Right. So as far back as I can remember, my grandparents, his father, started farming in this area. So I don't know what that puts me, 4th, 5th generation farmer. But yeah, it's been a while.
That's a good long span of tilling, planting, growing, harvesting. So yeah, very cool, very cool. And I'm very happy to see you here, and Katie, right? You two have met before, actually. Katie's the one who got us in contact with you. How did you guys get to know each other?
Katie and I went to high school together. We grew up through 4-H and FFA, kind of both things that probably inspired us both, besides the family farm, to continue a career in agriculture.
Oh, cool. So what high school did you go to down there?
Unity High School in Minden.
Oh, okay. Well, see, I'm a Blue Devil, so city kid.
Matthew and I were in FFA the same year, right? I was like a junior and you were a freshman.
Yep.
and I beat him for the star green hand. It was a very serious competition.
Oh my.
Yeah, Katie and I go way back.
So what made you decide to continue in farming, Matt? What was your decision to go into that career?
So as I said earlier, I think just growing up in 4-H and FFA and, being part of the family farm early on, I just kind of grew up with that passion and wanted to continue that and continue the family farm. A lot of farms today and the further we go into the future, there's not someone to continue that within the family. So it's getting leased out or sold to investors. And I think it's a part of, our family, our heritage. And I have the personal passion for raising crops and agronomy specifically. So I think all of those things kind of just fueled my fire to come back and help on the family farm.
Matt, I mean, you kind of mentioned how things are getting sold. There's fewer and fewer people to hand off family farms to. And I mean, I've grown up in rural Illinois all my life, but I was never we never farmed. We had dairy cattle and horses, but never acreage. And I didn't realize how lonely it can be as a farmer, in terms of planting and harvesting. A lot of times it's just one person doing a lot of that work there. So are you able to hire out, or how can you supplement at all? Because I know that it's kind of a dwindling trade, even in our neck of the woods.
Yeah, so it depends a lot on the scale and the individual operation, but there's a lot of farms out there that it's just a one-man band. He does the planting, the spraying, the harvest, all himself. And there's large-scale operations that have several people on a harvest team, several people on a tillage team, several people on a spring planting team, and anywhere in between. So for our operation, we have usually 3 to 4 guys helping out at any point in time, depending on where we are in the season. As operations scale up, they may have to hire out certain jobs like spraying or, add some labor at harvest for trucking and to run the grain cart. So there's definitely challenges as you grow, but those challenges prevent or provide opportunities as well.
I'm curious, Matt, are you a licensed pesticide applicator?
Yes, I am.
Aha. Well, then, Katie, if do you take the trainings that they do in Quincy every few years?
Yeah, so I don't think my license is up for renewal this year, but I'll have to take it again next year.
So Katie's probably going to be doing that training, right, Katie, that next year?
Yeah, hopefully we'll be back in person.
So don't tell her you're there, or else she's going to use you as she's going to tell the FFA story, I'm sure of it. So, you be careful. So
There
just
you go.
a heads up.
So along the lines of kind of size of farming. So when you think about farming, we can go from, an urban lot to thousands and thousands of acres, kind of what you've hinted at. What are some of the type of things people would need to invest in to kind of get farming when we're talking about kind of corn and beans?
Yeah, so corn and soybeans is typically an operation that you can't just start from scratch. It takes a lot of equipment. You obviously have to have the land there. The land can be leased, which provides a little, I guess, less barrier to entry than if you had to own land. But, typically on an acre of corn and soybeans, it's probably going to take anywhere from maybe $500 to $800 an acre of inputs, machinery, fuel, total cost put into that operation. There's a large investment up front. Think of it as taking your salary at the beginning of the year, burying it in the ground, and then hoping to come back in the fall and dig up more than what you buried at the start. That's kind of, in essence, what farming is like. But you don't always have that salary to start the year, so you borrow the money, bury it in the ground, pay interest on that the whole year, and then hope for the best in the fall.
I mean, the capital that would take for a combine. I know there's a few farmers we're friends with, and they bought a brand new green combine, and they had a special ceremony, a turn the key ceremony. up at the plant up in the Quad Cities, and would you believe it? The thing wouldn't turn on. So
Oh no.
That sounds kind of like our farm.
yeah. You spend almost $500,000 on this thing, and you
Uh-huh.
can't get it to start. Oh gosh.
Did that at least happen at the plant?
It happened at the plant, but it
That's
was
good.
like ceremonial. I mean, there was people, ribbons, and it was like,
Mhm.
oh, that's embarrassing. So, I mean, a lot of it's also based on luck, right, Matt? I mean, you're dependent upon things that you can't control at all.
Yeah, it's definitely a gamble. There's a lot of things left up to the good Lord and left up to Mother Nature. But we try to do everything we can to mitigate that risk, whether it's, alleviating compaction, whether it's marketing risk, whether it's, anything out there. There's only so many things that we can manage. So we try to manage what we can control, and leave the rest up to the good Lord.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we'll talk in a second about kind of what 2020 was like for you, but I'm curious in terms of maybe the last 5 to 10 years. Like, has farming been changing? Have you seen new issues popping up and kind of, since you've taken the reins on your farm there?
Right. So, I graduated college in 2016. So I've been helping throughout, but just starting to get more and more involved now. But there's definitely been a lot of changes, in the last 10 years and the last 20 years. It's crazy to think what changes are going to come in the next 10 and 20 years. But technology is definitely one of the biggest areas of change in recent history with agriculture. The advent of GPS and auto steering, yield mapping, variable rate fertilizer, planting, different technology on the planter with meters and drives, electric drives, row shutoffs. A lot of technology has been adopted and implemented to lower the wastage of products on an acre, and try to put those products where they need to be most efficiently.
I remember as a kid, I'd be able to go into cornfields, which terrifies me now as a parent. I don't want my child going to cornfield. It's like, watched too much movies as a kid. But anyway, but then I think I was a teenager or turn of the century, the spacing of corn shifted dramatically. They improved varieties. So then you could plant denser blocks of corn. And I was just like, holy cow, it almost doubled the amount you could fit in like a square foot. It was pretty, I mean, and that just happened. It felt like overnight, but I mean, it transitioned over a few years. And yeah, that's one of the things that really stands out to me.
Yeah, so not just the population or the number of plants per acre has, gone up from maybe 20,000 plants per acre of corn in the 80s and early 90s to now a lot of populations are 30 to 35, 36, up to 40,000 plants per acre. And the new technology and the meters has really made the precision of that. We've been able to, almost plant picket fence like stands where the spacing is so uniform, to allow for that higher population and higher yields.
Those yield maps are fun to watch in a combine too. And
Mhm.
and you can almost, after it's harvested, you can look out on the landscape, the kind of the topography there even, and you can almost compare the two and you're like, oh yeah, that's totally, it matches. You're getting lower yield in this low draw area where maybe you have a higher water table, the roots can't establish as well or not as much oxygen. So yes, I think the technology and everything that's come these last few years is so fascinating.
In grad school, we had a pamphlet that we had hanging in the lab, and it was how to achieve yields of 100 bushels per acre. And Matthew, as you probably know, we're far beyond that. So it's cool to see we've achieved that 100 bushels per acre.
As
Go
you
ahead.
mentioned that, my grandpa, I think he's got a plaque in his basement somewhere. It was the record yield in Adams County from, I don't know what year it was, but it was 160 or 65 bushel corn. And we think about that today, and that's pretty average to maybe even lower than average for what we can expect.
Some people might consider it a bad year if you get 160.
Right.
So I guess what is typical? What's the goal, I suppose?
So, last year there was a lot of corn in the 200, 220 range, probably in this county. This year, somewhat similar to lower, probably. But yeah, 200 bushel yield is a good goal for corn on average.
There's always people pushing for more. What's the record now? Is it 602?
Yeah, it's in the 600s.
It's in the 600s.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cow.
Obviously, they're growing it with irrigation, and that's in like Virginia or Georgia.
Yeah, Virginia and Georgia have kind of been the two leading states with the growers out there. But yeah, it tells you how much potential is out there, for that corn. So that's a goal to not just raise 600 bushel corn on an acre, a 10-acre plot, but can we push some of these areas of the field that we know on the yield maps are historically our best part of the field? Can we get those to move up to 300 bushel to pull that field average up overall? And then can we focus, what can we do in the red areas of the yield map to bring them up to the 160 to the 200?
So I dwelling on this a little bit, but now I'm curious, as yield and bushel per acre go up, you'd supposedly get more money, but you also mentioned new technologies before and new things that you have to buy. So, I mean, it sometimes does it feel like you're not always getting ahead, or can sometimes it feel like, well, now I can buy this piece of equipment, or I can use this now. How does that work?
Sometimes it feels like you're always behind because you kind of get, what's the word? Not encouraged, but you get penalized for producing higher yield because that drives the price down. If everybody in the country produces a high yield, that raises the supply of crop, and then at the end of harvest, you're looking at lower prices, which in the end can equal the same revenue or less or more. Just it kind of all depends. But there's two factors to the revenue on the farm, and one is yield and one is price. And price we really can't control. We can do the best we can through the year to market that grain and mitigate risk and use options and futures and different types of contracts from a marketing standpoint. But they both have to go into that.
Speaking of prices and difficulties in farming, how was farming during the pandemic? What challenges did you encounter?
So from my personal perspective, I think 2020 was a really good year for farmers. In West Central Illinois, in this area, we had pretty good yields. Probably the toughest part was the volatility of the markets. Just like your retirement accounts, we saw a lot of volatility in the markets in corn and soybeans. And so that was a little bit of a challenge, but from a pandemic perspective, social distancing, it wasn't really hard for farmers because we're already out here with a couple people. You stay in the tractor cab all day. When you're planting, you may only come into contact with the person bringing you seed or fertilizer or the grain cart. But really that was pretty simple, not a lot of changes to take place. Some of the bigger operations you maybe had to watch that a certain person was staying with a certain machine and you weren't jumping from one cab to the other. But for the most part, 2020 was a really good year for farmers in this area. And on top of that, this fall we had great weather, dry weather for harvest. We weren't fighting the mud. We weren't fighting compaction. A lot of fall work was able to get done, leveling ditches and doing any fall tillage that needed to be done. So there was a good window this fall for that.
Yeah, it was a pretty remarkably dry fall. It seemed like, at least. And I haven't checked the drought monitor yet. I don't know if anyone else has, but before we were looking as though we were in a drought, and without this most recent rain and snowfall to help recharge some of that groundwater, I know in terms of planting this spring, that could be a significant issue if we go into planting season with dry soil. So I don't know, Matt, So even though are you like off the clock now in the winter time? What do you do in the winter?
Yeah, so in terms of the moisture, it's definitely been really dry, but it's hard to complain about that. We like to go into the spring with a full tank of moisture, but we know that it takes a long time to establish dry or drought conditions, and you can turn really wet and muddy almost overnight. So we're not forecasting a drought or thinking that it's going to be a drought at this point by any means. But yeah, the winter time, for farmers, a lot of that time is spent working on equipment, getting things ready, maybe repairing stuff that from fall work, combines, tillage equipment, getting that stuff put away for the year, and then bringing planters, sprayers, spring tillage equipment into the shop and starting to get that stuff, prepared and ready for the spring. So on top of that, looking at your yield maps, having meetings, learning some of that new technology that's coming out, learning what improvements you can make to your equipment, to your operation, to your practices. There's a lot of management decisions that get made in the winter. So the farmers definitely aren't sitting idle this time of year. It is slow compared to the spring and fall, but there's a lot of decisions getting made now.
So speaking of kind of learning stuff, and when you have problems and stuff, where does a farmer typically turn to? Is it more private or kind of public type things like extension?
Yeah, so it depends on the farmer, and it depends on what the problem is. So definitely extension is a good resource for a lot of things. You can go to the internet nowadays to find quite a bit of things if you've got a farmer that's not adept or able to, like my dad, he's never turned on a computer, so he's not going to be one to go to the internet. He'll go to the dealership or to other farmers in the area and kind of exploit their resources. What have they seen in the same situation? So there's a lot of different avenues to get information. So kind of just depends on the farmer. Good growing podcast, that would be another great location to go for information.
And they got a really cool guest on this week, I hear. So.
Right.
All right. Well, good growing. We, in addition to learning about our special guest for this week, we are also a question and answer show. And so we did solicit the wide world of extension in the internets and the offices and such about questions for a farmers, the Ask a Farmer segment here. So Matt, would you mind helping us answer some of these questions that have come in this last few weeks?
Absolutely. I'd love to.
All right, fantastic. Well, Katie, why don't you go ahead, since you know Matt so well, we're just really going to put his feet to the fire here. Why don't you start him out with our first question, please?
Absolutely. So our first question comes from Knox County. This person is asking, Illinois seems to lag behind other states when it comes to cover crop usage. Why, and will we start seeing more cover crops being used?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's been a lot of hype in the agricultural world about cover crops in the past, 5 to 10 years. And one thing that cover crops are really great at is reducing erosion. So we can see them hold the soil, get those roots established, and protect soil from washing away. One of the areas that benefits most is on steep sloped ground. So the more slope you have, the more prone it is to erosion. So that's an area where cover crops can be really beneficial in controlling that erosion. If you take flat ground like central Illinois, even up in the Macomb area or in river bottoms, et cetera, we don't have that much erosion. And so you don't get the erosion benefit from that cover crop. Obviously, there's a lot of other benefits out there, but it's, you always have to weigh the pros and the cons. And a lot of the benefits of cover crops are hard to put a price on. Soil health, increasing organic matter, reducing erosion, those things, it's somewhat difficult to put a hard number on, but one thing that's easy to put a number on is the yield difference. So if we split a field or have a check strip with a cover crop and we see a 4 or 5 bushel difference, then it's pretty easy to know that, what that's costing us. So it cost us $30 or $40 an acre to put in that cover crop. So we need, for corn, we may need, a 10 bushel gain to recoup that cost, if we're not considering any of the other benefits. If we get a 10 bushel loss from that cover crop, and the challenges that it posed, then all of a sudden it cost you $40, plus you lost $40 in your corn yield. So now you're $80 in the hole. So that's been kind of a barrier to cover crops all along the way. I'm not saying that there's places that they don't work and work well, like livestock operations. If you can incorporate the cover crop as erosion control plus feed for your livestock, and on top of that, maybe double crop soybeans or something behind it, then it's an extremely good fit.
There can be some issues with establishment as well, correct? So if we don't get our crop out soon enough, it can be difficult to get it established enough. And so if you've spent that money on the cover crop and you're not able to get it to grow, you're not really going to get much of an effect from it, especially if it's one that's not going to overwinter.
Right. When farming is a business, and if the primary revenue source of that business is the cash crop, then anything that hinders that cash crop can be a negative to the business. So there's just a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. And I would say that profit-wise, that's probably the main reason why cover crops haven't been adopted widespread by everyone on every acre. Is, if it was profitable every time, everybody would be doing it on every acre, but it's not. So that's why you see it more in some areas than in others.
So how I deal a lot in commercial landscaping, we always say there's no such thing as a property that's the same. You can't take a rubber stamp necessarily and do the same thing every day. And you're saying something similar, that you really have to look and go by farm basis upon, is this practice suitable for your operation? And I've also, so an interesting fact that I tell people all the time, and this, you can use this at your next trivia party or cocktail party, Super Bowl coming up. The second flattest state is Illinois. First flattest state, Florida. So there you go. Topography wise, Central Illinois, God's bulldozer came through and flattened it out. I lived in Kansas for 5 years. That's not flat. No, you got to live in Adams County or McDonough County, and you'll see flat there. So
I did not know that. I've lived in the 2 flattest states then.
There you go.
I wouldn't have thought Illinois would be the second flattest.
Yeah, it's Central Illinois. I mean, we're the ones making us number 2 there. So we're pulling our weight.
All right, our next question comes from Northern Illinois, and they have a little more elevation up there. They've heard some fall tillage described as recreational tillage, or something board farmers do in the fall. So why do we see so much tillage going on during the fall?
So yeah, that's, there's definitely cases where, it may look like that, but usually when tillage is being done, there's a goal in mind, whether it's alleviate some compaction or incorporate residue to lower the amount of disease in the following crop, or to ease the plantability of that crop. So when you've got a lot of residue, or, in the past it's been called trash, there's a lot of trash in the way when you're planting, that can cause problems with stand establishment. So I'd say the main reasons for tillage, is alleviating any compaction, incorporating residue, and then also helping the soils warm up in the spring and dry out to facilitate that planting. So if if land's not tiled with drainage, there's no way for water to escape from the subsurface through the tile. So it's basically, you need to evaporate off the top in order to get that dry enough to work.
So Matt, I've also heard that some of the new corn genetics, even the residue takes longer to break down, or it can be a little bit more difficult to break down. Is that true? Do you see that with some of the newer breeds of corn that are getting planted?
So there has been talk about that with like the BT hybrids that have stronger stalks due to being somewhat more resistance to insects. I don't know if there's research on that specifically that show that it breaks down slower or faster. But definitely with higher yields, there's more residue to break down, and the quality of that residue can be different. So definitely, it's another thing that differs from field to field. So if you're growing 120 bushel corn, there's going to be a lot less residue in that field than if you're growing 240 bushel corn. There's a lot more residue to break down. So sometimes light tillage passes can be done to sort of chop up the residue into smaller pieces, and then more aggressive tillage to sort of work that into the soil profile.
So our next question comes from Morgan County, and they are wondering, what are those big white tanks that we see? There you go. Being hauled around often in the fall, sometimes in the spring. And what is that used for?
Yeah, so the white tanks typically are carrying anhydrous ammonia. It's a source of nitrogen fertilizer for mainly corn. That is, the total product is 82% nitrogen. So it's one of the most concentrated forms of nitrogen we have, which usually makes it one of the cheapest forms of nitrogen that we have as well. So economic wise, it's a good source to use. In the fall, it's the best source of any nitrogen to use when you're applying in the fall, because it's applied as ammonia, and it's more stable in the soil versus a liquid nitrogen that could be leached through the profile. So applying anhydrous in the fall, actually we've got some plots and some studies that we're looking at this year and next year on different ways to apply nitrogen, splitting your application with fall anhydrous and spring nitrogen, different combinations out there to try to evaluate what's the best on this particular field. But yeah, the white tanks are usually carrying anhydrous ammonia.
Now, we know that nitrogen is fairly mobile in the soil. Is it a good idea to apply nitrogen in the fall, or is it better to wait in the spring? Is there anything that you can do to protect that nitrogen to keep it from being leached or lost for our next growing season?
So nitrogen as nitrate is fairly mobile in the soil. As ammonia or ammonium, it's not that mobile. So that's why the fall nitrogen is getting put on as ammonium or anhydrous ammonium. There are inhibitors that can be used, and a lot of times, I would guess over 90% of fall nitrogen goes out with something like Inserv, which is a nitrification inhibitor that keeps the nitrogen in that ammonium form that's not mobile. When we come into the spring, that anhydrous ammonium gets converted to nitrate by microbes in the soil. So the Inserv kind of preserves it in the ammonium form until we get to where that crop needs it. But there's challenges there as well, because if you apply too soon when the soils are warm, you can use up that inhibitor to where it can convert to nitrate, and then you can be more susceptible to loss over the winter.
All right, so our next question comes from Greene County. They would like to know, what are the planes spraying on the fields in the summer? See them buzzing across the roads and stuff like that.
Yep. So 90+% of the time, that's going to be a fungicide. They can spray fungicide on corn or soybeans, but a lot of times that's what's going out through the plains. There can be some foliar fertilizers or some insecticides if those are warranted, but primarily they're going to be foliar fungicides to control disease and promote plant health in corn and soybeans.
We actually saw aerial applicators early fall this year, and they were planting, I think it was tillage radish. They were sowing it by air, which that was pretty cool. Because you get used to seeing them in the summer, but then they pop up in the fall, and you're like, what are these? What are the planes doing right now? There's nothing going on.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the challenges with cover crops, and the farther you go north, it's more of a challenge. But getting that cover crop established before it's too cold in the winter. So one of the ways they combat that is seeding with an airplane into a standing crop to sort of get that relay started. So then after you harvest the cash crop, the cover crop's already growing.
It was neat to see, and I didn't know where the field was. It was across the railroad tracks, across the highway here, but I wanted to see how well did it establish. I wanted to see the pattern that was created by that, but we never got a chance to go out there.
Our success rate with aerial seeding has probably been less than 50%. So,
wow.
You can just imagine scattering seed over the surface versus tucking it into the ground at the proper depth with good seed to soil contact. There's going to be quite a bit difference. It can work. Aerial seeding can work if you get, timely rains, but again, you're leaving more up to Mother Nature if you just aerial apply versus if you can, drill that in or something, plant it into the soil.
Our next question comes from Facebook. So they keep hearing about soil loss and degradation. What are Illinois farmers doing to help protect the land to ensure we can keep farming in the future?
And so soil loss and degradation, that can be several different things, whether it's erosion or soil health, compaction, loss of organic matter. There's a lot of different things that could be. I would say, most Illinois farmers, any farmers don't want to see that happen, right? That's the avenue that their business runs on. That's, the land is providing fertility, nutrients. And if they don't take care of the land, it won't take care of them. So nobody intentionally wants to lose that soil. So things like minimum tillage, moving to less tillage if it's not needed. Maybe just one pass in the fall versus two, or maybe just one pass in the spring. That can reduce some of those effects. Doing tillage in a no-till system can promote soil health. If you have compaction, you're going to be better off getting air into that soil so the microbes, the roots, can breathe and grow better than if you've got a compacted no-till farm. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. But yeah, most farmers are trying to take care of that and do the best they can.
So on the soil health, have you ever buried underwear in your soil to see if it breaks down?
I have not. I don't remember what that test is called, but yeah, I've seen it.
As there you go. That's your one of your research studies for this year. We can just take some Hanes tidy whities, put it somewhere in a couple plots.
Yeah, soil your undies, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
All right, our last question also comes from social media. So dicamba has been making the news the last few years. Illinois Department of Ag has increasingly gets reports of herbicide drift onto other fields, fruit and vegetable growers, landscapes, nurseries, residential areas, you name it. Last year, a court removed the label from use, but now it looks like the EPA is approving a new one. What do farmers think about this? Is it a good tool? Is it destined to lead to resistance like a lot of other herbicides have?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the end. Resistance-wise, there's already resistance to dicamba and to 2,4-D and those types of herbicide. But with that being said, there's still a good tool in areas where they're not resistance. So if that's the only tool that you're using, yes, you're probably going to develop resistance a lot quicker. But if you're using that tool kind of as an integrated approach with other weed management, tactics like tillage or like multiple modes of action, crop rotation, stuff like that, then all of a sudden, you can slow that development of resistance and preserve that technology. So I think most farmers recognize its effectiveness and its usefulness as a tool in that system. How you feel about it probably depends on what side of the fence you've been on. If you've drifted on somebody else or if they've drifted on you. I know there's a lot of feelings in that arena, but as I see it, As a consultant and as a farmer myself, I think it is a good tool. We just have to make sure that we apply it correctly and take all the necessary precautions and use it as an integrated approach in our weed management strategy.
Yeah, Matt. I mean, talking to farmers, I hear the same thing. Both sides of the spectrum. Some are like, everyone should use it, then we won't have a problem. Others are like, I'll never use this no matter what I ever do. And then there's the farmers right in the middle that say, I'm going to use it to knock down this troublesome population, and then I'm going to rotate through this every few years. So they're coming up with like a plan, like you just said, an integrated pest management plan to utilize this tool. Because you're right, you probably will lead to resistance, but the better we can utilize this as an integrated approach, the longer we will have this as a tool. So I think, yeah, but so do you know, Matt, is this going to be something that will be used this coming growing season with the new label coming out?
Yeah, so it has been registered in Illinois now. There's a federal label and there's an Illinois label. I'm not sure if they've ironed out all the specifics on the Illinois label. In the past, there's been higher restrictions on when you can spray. There's been more restrictions for Illinois than there has been on the federal label. So the Illinois EPA is trying to take steps to mitigate the number of problems and complaint calls and drift issues with this product.
And in the past, every applicator had to take special training that year. Are they going to have to redo that training? Have you heard, or is it?
I believe so. I
Okay.
believe there'll be new training because it was an annual based training for that product.
Yeah, those were incredibly popular. We would have 200 people show up for a pesticide applicator training, and then 500 people show up for the dicamba Extend Max trainings that they held after that. So, I mean, because they are required, for applicators to take those. So very controversial here. And I think that's a good place for us to kind of end off. Ken, Katie, don't you think? Let's end on a note of controversy so we can get ready to talk to our big boss next week, the dean. So
Sounds good.
there you go. And I also, in terms of like cover cropping, opinion wise here, I think that's a place where extension could really serve a useful role as the risk taker to do some of that research and partner with farmers and kind of shoulder more of that risk instead of having farmers kind of figure it out as they go along. So I think extension, we could play a bigger role in that. So hopefully we will. And so Ken, make sure you say that to the dean next week. Write that down.
We'll just invite Matthew back.
You got a pretty good cover crop guy up there at WIU.
Oh yeah.
You want to talk to Dr. Groover? He's always got a lot of good information on cover crops.
Dr. Fippin's trying to use pennycress as a cover crop, which has some potential.
Yeah, we've got some farmers trying to use that as well. I don't know if they're using it for the same purpose.
Works pretty natural as well.
Well, I've noticed the winter annuals that germinate like pennycress.
Yeah.
They do just fine in the farm fields because don't you just plow them under in the spring, right? And then they're
right, or spray them.
Yeah.
We actually had a girl do a cover crop for her thesis, for her master's thesis. She did a cover crop study, and she couldn't get any of the cover crops to germinate. All that germinated were weeds, and the weed plot was the best control.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know. I think like the fields, I know driving through Adams County, there's some that just get full of henbit. They're just purple in the spring. That's so cool to see. And you just till them under and then no problem. So, well, Matt, thank you so much for being on the Ask a Farmer episode here. I mean, so you lend a really unique and a valuable perspective here to our questions, because we just keep talking all these extension people. I mean, we don't have that much else to say. So I'm glad to finally talk to someone out in the field.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always like the opportunity to help educate the public and understand what it is that we do, because we know there's a lot of questions out there, but there's nothing better than hearing it straight from the horse's mouth on what we're doing and what we're seeing out there. So definitely like to get those questions answered.
Well, the Good Growing Podcast is produced by Wendy Ferguson and edited by me, Chris Enroth. A special thanks goes out to Katie Parker Ken Johnson for being our intrepid co-host and navigating us through the topic of this week of agriculture, which kind of is every week, isn't it? So yeah, thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt, Chris, Ken.
Thank you, Chris and Matt and Katie. And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall, but I'm terrified of it because we're going to be talking to the Dean of the College of Aces, the big head honcho, the boss here that signs all our paychecks. So we will be chatting with Dean Kim Kidwell next week about all things extension, what's happening on campus, what's life like for a dean during the year of 2020, now 2021, midst of a pandemic. So we're looking forward to talking with Dean Kidwell. I might call in sick next week, but everyone, listeners, thanks for doing what you do best, and that is listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching, and as always, keep on growing.